Today, we are jumping into one of the most practical, in-your-face books in the entire Bible, the letter of James. It's a book all about making sure that what you say you believe actually shows up in how you live. But you know, the real key to understanding this book isn't just the message, it's the messenger.
I mean, think about it. What if the guy who wrote this spiritual boot camp, this intense guide to a faith that actually works, was someone who, during Jesus' own life, was standing on the sidelines pretty convinced his own brother had gone completely off the deep end?
Well, that's exactly what happened. The author wasn't some lifelong day-one disciple. He was a skeptic. He was family. He was James, the half-brother of Jesus. And honestly, his incredible journey from doubter to leader is the secret to unlocking this entire book.
So here's our game plan. We're going to dive into who this unlikely author was. Then we'll look at the high-stakes world he was writing to. We are going to solve that whole works versus faith debate once and for all, pull out some real wisdom for your Monday morning, and then wrap up with the final challenge that James leaves for every single one of us.
Okay, let's get right into it, because you really can't get the letter until you get the man. So who exactly was James?
First, just a quick thing on his name. In the original Greek, it's Iakopos, which comes from the Hebrew name Jacob. You probably know that name better as Jacob. But, through centuries of translation, in English we know him as James.
Now here's where his story gets absolutely wild. While Jesus is out there teaching and performing miracles, his own family, including James, literally thought he was out of his mind. The Bible is shockingly honest about this. But then, something happened. Something that changed everything. The Apostle Paul tells us that after the resurrection, Jesus made a special, personal appearance to James. And that one encounter, well, it turned a skeptic into a believer, and that believer into a leader, a central pillar of the very first church in Jerusalem.
So when James sits down to write this letter, you have to understand, this isn't some quiet academic exercise in a library. He is writing an urgent, passionate message from the middle of a crisis to people whose faith is being pushed to the absolute breaking point.
Let's just put ourselves in his world for a second. We're talking mid-first century. He's leading the Jerusalem church. A massive famine has struck the region, which means crushing poverty is everywhere. His people are scattered, and he himself will eventually be killed for the very faith he once doubted. This is the intense backdrop for his letter.
He's writing to people who are poor, who are looked down on, who are facing serious pressure to just give up. I mean, they're dealing with all of it. So the real temptation wasn't just to abandon their faith completely, but to water it down, to make it this private, internal belief that didn't actually change anything or cost them anything. And James is having absolutely none of that.
The Greek word James uses for all this hardship is perismosos, and it has this really cool double meaning. It can mean a trial that builds you up or a temptation that tears you down. The best way to think about it is like a moral gymnasium. Life puts this heavy weight on your shoulders. If you see it as a test, lifting it can make you stronger. But if you give in, that exact same weight can crush you.
And the whole point of enduring these trials is to become teleos. Now, that's a Greek word James loves. He uses it 7 times. We translate it as perfect, but it doesn't mean flawless. It means whole, complete. It's this idea of becoming an integrated person, where your actions are totally in sync with your beliefs. There's just no gap between what you say on Sunday and what you do on Monday. That's the goal.
All right, so this idea of a whole integrated faith leads us straight to the most famous and maybe the most misunderstood part of his entire letter. For literally centuries, people have pitted James against the Apostle Paul like it's some kind of theological cage match that never even needed to happen.
And here it is, the verse that started it all. James chapter 2. You see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. But wait a minute, didn't the Apostle Paul argue over and over that we're saved by faith alone, not by works? It sounds like a total contradiction. But here's the thing, they weren't contradicting each other at all, not even a little bit. The best way to get this is to think of them as 2 doctors treating 2 totally different sicknesses. Paul was fighting legalism, this idea that you have to do good works in order to earn your salvation. James, on the other hand, was fighting lazy faith, the idea that, hey, since I'm saved, I don't have to do any good works at all. See, they were both protecting the exact same truth just from opposite attacks.
It all comes down to what James means by the word works, or ergon in Greek. For him, works aren't what you do to get saved. They are the natural, unavoidable proof that you are saved. He says faith without works is dead because a faith that doesn't do anything is fake. An apple tree doesn't struggle and strain to make apples. If it's a living, healthy apple tree, it just makes apples. For James, good works are simply the fruit that proves the tree is alive.
Okay, so if faith has to be practical, what does that actually look like? Well, James basically gives us a masterclass in applied spirituality. And what's amazing is that almost every single line echoes the teachings of the brother he once thought was crazy.
James uses this super rare Greek word, one he might have even made up himself, dipsychos. It literally means two-souled. Just picture trying to drive a car that has two steering wheels and each one is trying to go in a different direction. It would be chaos, right? That's his picture of spiritual instability. A person trying to be loyal to God and loyal to the world at the same time. He says that person is going to be unstable in everything they do.
And a huge part of being a single-souled person for James comes down to what comes out of your mouth. He gives us incredibly direct command about how we talk about each other. He says our words have the power to steer our entire lives, like a tiny rudder on a huge ship, or a little spark that can burn down a whole forest. For him, the tongue is the ultimate lie detector for what's really going on in the heart.
And it's no shock where he's getting this from. This isn't some new idea. It is a direct echo of his brother's most famous teaching, the Sermon on the Mount. You can basically read the entire book of James as a practical how-to guide for the Sermon on the Mount. He's saying, okay, you heard Jesus teach it, now here's how you actually live it.
But listen, there are parts of his letter that can make us a little uncomfortable today. Like his fiery, almost furious language he uses when talking about the wealthy. It can sound like he's just angry at anybody who has money. So, what is really going on there?
To get this, we have to see it in its original context. This wasn't a rant against having a nice house. In the first century economy, the rich James is yelling at were powerful landowners who would hire guys for a day's work and then, at the end of the day, just refuse to pay them. For a family with no savings, no safety net, unpaid wages didn't just mean a tight budget. It meant their kids didn't eat. It meant starvation. This, for James, was a matter of life and death.
And all of this, the trials, the faith and works debate, the stuff about our words and seeking justice, it all builds to one final, pointed challenge that he just leaves ringing in our ears.
This one verse just perfectly sums up his entire message. After all the teaching and all the arguments, he boils it down to this. What does real religion look like? It's not about fancy ceremonies or having perfect theology. It's about caring for the most vulnerable people in society, the orphans and widows, the ones with zero social power. It is active, hands-on compassion.
So in the end, James, the man who went from skeptic to martyr, leaves us with this inescapable question. He argues that real, living faith is like a fire. You can't hide it. It's always going to produce heat and light. It always shows up in your actions, in your words, in your priorities, and in how you treat people. So he asks us, and I'll leave you with this same question: what is your faith doing?